Welcome to the Island Treasures mini podcast for caregivers. I'm your host and certified caregiving consultant, Allison Van Schie of Alongside Caregiver Consulting. This episode is brought to you by our sponsors, Cabin Tilly Contractors in the Comox Valley on beautiful Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada, where we care too. Having Dr. DeLon Canterbury as a guest on the Island Treasures podcast shed a light on the importance of including a savvy pharmacist as a member of your caregiving support system. Before DeLon became a pharmacist, his grandmother, who had mild dementia, experienced a significant and rapid worsening of her symptoms. Take a listen to hear what was behind that change.
My parents had to take care of my grandmother as her mild dementia symptoms turned to severe. And it didn't really make much sense at the time. We were doing everything we needed to. She was in a nursing home, so she was getting the medical supervision and care that we thought we were paying for. But we ended up realizing that there were some pretty significant behavior changes with my grandmother, Mildred. She would become more irritable. She would be angry. She would not recognize who she was talking to. That was the number one thing we noticed was she was just not aware. She was speaking to, a deceased relative over the phone. And it's like, Grandma, it's us. So with her worsening symptoms, we were shocked to find out that the facility that was taking care of her no longer wanted to see her. They ended up saying, look, we cannot manage her. We can't manage these symptoms. And so they eventually kicked her out, right?
Oh.
It didn't make sense. But we had to move her from New York down to Georgia. And, I wasn't a pharmacist just yet, but my parents now are figuring out Medicare and how to get her placed in a new facility. How do we get support at home and a caregiver around the clock? How do we make sure things are locked so she's not wandering out in the neighborhood? So all of this, my parents had to deal with and maneuver while they're being full-time parents and full-time employees. And that always struck a chord with me and just seeing how much of a cost this was for us to navigate. But more importantly, the sad part was noticing how we didn't, up to her care at this point, didn't have someone look adequately at the medications. And so Mildred was given an antipsychotic prescription, which is meant to treat patients with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. But sadly, we see these medications used a lot in some of these senior-facing facilities or long-term care pharmacies and skilled nursing facilities. Ironically, that medication was what worsened all of my grandma's mild dementia to severe, that led to her being kicked out, that led to us at home now trying to deal with a wandering grandmother, someone who's more irritable. And it took literally 4 months of struggle before a Rite Aid pharmacist looked at this medication upon a refill and noticed, hey, this might be the root cause of all of the issues.
Wow.
Like, literally, I know, literally a medication that has an FDA warning to avoid using this in patients with dementia.
Boy.
Crazy. She eventually was weaned off the medicine over about 2.5 weeks and returned to her normal, mildly cognitive impaired self. Mildly.
Seriously.
So totally preventable. Absolutely. It's sad, but at that point, I mean, I wasn't a pharmacist yet, but how many people don't have someone to advocate? How many people just fall through the cracks and they're characterized as another medical statistic or put in harm's way or incur this amount of cost and energy and time? It was a huge stress on the family, and I don't want that to happen to any other caregivers going forward, which is why I created geriatrics.
The situation DeLon described of his grandmother receiving a medication that was not recommended for someone with dementia highlighted the importance of having a trustworthy pharmacist as an advocate in your caregiving support system. Do you have a pharmacist as part of your caregiving team? I recognize how precious your time is, especially as caregivers, and so this mini podcast is designed just for you. And when you have more time, I invite you to listen to the full episode called Pharmacists, the Best Kept Secret. Thanks for listening to this mini podcast or watching the video version of the mini podcast. And thank you to Dr. DeLon Canterbury for sharing your caregiving story, your insights, and for inviting folks to visit geriatrics.org. Take care.